Final Fantasy XI has had a long 15+ year run, and much of that success has been thanks to a large list of diverse jobs to play as. While largely successful in keeping all of those jobs carefully balanced, new expansions, abilities, hell, jobs in general has shifted that balance back and forth over the years, and there have been clear winners and losers. So hey guys, it's Hunt for Games, and I'm following up on my promise for my top 5 best jobs of Final Fantasy XI video, which is below in the description, with one possibly even more asked for, top 5 worst jobs. As with the last one, I have to open with the fact that this list is ridiculous. Final Fantasy XI is a game of flexibility, strategy, and teamwork, and one of my favorite parts of its design is how well most of the game is balanced around all of those different jobs working well together. Most jobs are pretty damn strong in their own way, and deciding who's best and worst over the entire lifespan of Final Fantasy XI is basically impossible due to how different the game has become. Worst jobs has also been way harder than best jobs because frankly, I love all the jobs on this list and I don't really think that they suck. It's kind of my whole thing. But of course, that's not going to stop me from trying to put it together anyway. So here are the rules. Same as last time, I'll be deciding the worst jobs through their ranking in solo ability, partying, and missions or endgame content. While every expansion, update, and even level 99 era does apply, I have to exclude Runefencer and Geomancer as they missed all of the level 75 era content. And to be fair, I'll probably be leaning towards the job's viability in the 75 era more than 99. Just because, come on, I mean 99 has broken so many things. So let's get going. Number 5, Dragoon. Final Fantasy XI introduced an incredible concept to invoke the feeling of limit breaks in the form of 2-hour abilities. Used once every 2 hours, they were essentially pushing your character to the absolute limit, pulling out all the stops to salvage a victory from defeat. At least that was the idea, for everyone other than Dragoon. For many years, Dragoon's 2-hour was the Wyvern, summoning a companion to assist in damage, breath attacks, and the beloved healing breath, depending on your support job. Dragoon's connection to the Wyvern and how its abilities shifted based on your sub-job was one of the coolest mechanics in Final Fantasy XI, and one of the reasons I fell in love with the job, and in many ways the game itself. It was also super annoying in a game where AoEs and poisons were all too common when your Wyvern died 5 minutes into popping them, leaving you weak, sad, and lonely until that 2-hour came back up, you know, an hour and 55 minutes later. It's all well and good that it's one of the highest damaging 2 hours if the Wyvern stays alive, you know, over the course of those 2 hours. But the job was balanced around the idea that it was, and you also didn't have another 2-hour to fall back on when shit inevitably hit the fan. Add to that it was on the wrong side of the two-handed versus dual wielders argument for too many years, benefited absolutely zilch from Ninja Sub, and wasn't exactly coming in first in the pulling department. It just kinda drew the short straw in a lot of ways. Now that doesn't really fit into my 3 types of criteria, but it is important for understanding why this job struggled, and the stigma alone made it difficult even after a lot of the above had been fixed or reworked. But let's break it down. Soloing, Dragoon was a mixed bag, with the Artifact Helm and Mage Sub giving your Wyvern some awesome heals for the cost of a Dia or Foot Kick as long as you were under 50% health. But here's the kicker, to get a heal to fire off you had to be under half health, making you particularly susceptible to a bad string of double attacks or a TP move or basically, you know, all the stuff that enemies love to do to you all the time. As a Tara, I'm a little biased here, as I had the lowest HP window of all the races to fire off those healing breaths, but it was a difficult way to solo for everyone. And with the way experience was in Final Fantasy XI, all it takes is one death every 10 to 15 enemies to cancel out all that hard work that you just tried to do. Again, super fun, but what kind of sick joke was Square Enix playing that you could get a heal off, but you had to wait until basically it was too late to do it? So how about parties? Well, parties Dragoon did alright. In the 75 era, Dragoons lucked out during the Calibri Rage because they were weak to piercing, but still struggled to find a place in burn parties that preferred ninja subs at the time. Super jump to toss away your hate was helpful, but couldn't quite compare to shrugging off a few hits altogether because of shadows. Throughout the level ranges, they had pros and cons like anybody else, but their weapon skills never really seemed to make up for it. The samurai changes with Hasso and Saigon made things better for sure, but there's no denying that was an attempt to get two-handers back up to par with dual wielders in terms of popularity, and I don't know if it totally succeeded. One of the faster jobs to get DP, they were definitely great for setting up skill chains back in the day, but they were lacking in overall weapon skill damage. Once burn parties became all the rage, it just wasn't as great because, you know, Penethrust was pretty solid at level 50, but after that there just really wasn't all that much until the most difficult to obtain weapon skills from things like Nazulile and relic weapons. For the average part-timing Dragoon, it was just kinda tough. Now in 99 it's finally become the powerhouse it was always meant to be, but realistically it's still just one of many jobs capable of opening and closing skill chains. Yes, it can get DP super quick, but so can most jobs. So how about missions and quests? Well, to be honest, Dragoon held its weight here, and it's why it's number 5 and not lower on this list. Or higher? I forget how that works. Dragoon does a great job for getting TP super fast at the beginning of a fight with jumps and meditates, and owning house with the skill chain seconds in. Its unique healing breath mechanic could occasionally be used as an effective strategy if everybody was on board, especially for specific BCNMs where you kinda had Dragoons and nothing else. What's up, Royal Jelly? And super jumps to get out of the fire during a bad AoE or particularly unlucky hate stealing moment are perfect for those single badass fights against one guy. Having said all that, it still doesn't do anything particularly unique. Angon is nice, but probably wouldn't mean the difference between victory and defeat, and that was basically it. Look, I love it, it's one of my favorite jobs of all time, and just so we're clear, Dragoon was one of my first 75s. I loved rocking my little Tarantara around in that beautiful purple armor. I love this job, and will defend it to my death as one of the best in Final Fantasy XI. This list is ridiculous. Bringing us to number 4, Beastmaster. Now, Beast was a tough one for me to have on this list, because it's incredibly solid now in 99, and like all pet jobs, there was always a pets-only strategy that made it desired in rare scenarios. But Beast was a job that was built opposite to how Final Fantasy XI was really designed to work, and that caused it a lot of problems. Beast was uniquely focused around the charm mechanic, bending enemies temporarily to their will to gain experience solo or with one or two other Beastmasters. It's a really cool trait, and for years basically the only job capable of effectively soloing for experience points in any real situation other than like Beast pets and weird things like that. Having said that, Square Enix never really seemed to know what they wanted the job to be. The trick to the job was leave at level 35, which allowed players to release their pet right before the enemy died. Why would you do that, you ask? Because that charmed bumblebee would actually steal your XP like some sort of deranged party member. For a long time, jug pets worked the same way, so beasts were just not really liked for parties. I mean, they couldn't have pets out, so they were just kind of wailing around with axes as like some sort of inferior warrior. Once the jug pet change came into play, it was just hard to break that stigma, and it was still rough for those poor little beasties that did want a party. It also used to be impossible to tell the pet what ability to use. It was just random. Over the years, this shifted from better chance for certain moves at certain TP levels, like 100, 200, and 300 TP were all different sets of moves, or abilities that flat out let you choose once past the 75 mark, but it was tough going for a while. It was just a strange job that was tough to work around sometimes, which is sort of the point. It's forever a soloer or doer. It had that stigma of wandering the wilderness alone and rarely playing well with others, and that's sort of how it was seen. So how does it fit into our criteria? Soloing, it's obviously Beast. And that alone almost edged it out of this list. At 119, it's stronger than ever, with jug pets really coming into their own and new abilities allowing them to choose which TP move to fire off, meaning you could just like throw out a bunch of AoEs almost in complete safety. At 75 though, despite its fame as the #1 soloer, it was still kind of annoying. First, you had to have one of the most frustrating level ranges ever getting to level 35. I mean, I swear Beast beat out White Mage in this regard. It was super awful. At 35, you could use leave, but before that, you had to do the ghetto leave strategy. It was awful, challenging, and dangerous, involving you just kind of like trying to get the enemy to kill your pet right at the end of the fight so you could kill it seconds afterwards. Then once you even got leave, you had to carefully release your pet at the last second, resulting in the occasional death if you released it too early, and often fight in dangerous areas surrounded by dangerous mobs, because those were the mobs you wanted to charm, the crazy difficult to kill one. Every beast has felt the pain of failing to charm a jelly like 5 times in a row and going down for seemingly no reason, and if you managed to get by without those mishaps, you could probably get a little less than your average party's XP rate. I mean, it wasn't great. You can't just give yourself amazing DD gear like most jobs either and make it a faster experience, because as soon as you start out-damaging your pet too much, you have a problem. So you had to just like tread that line carefully, never doing too much, limiting your overall damage output a lot. Yeah, you could head out to a camp and start partying immediately after logging in, essentially, and I loved that. It was the coolest part of soloing. But it's not like you were just like flying at every camp. My point is, while it gets an A+ for soloing, it was still a pain in the ass. So how about parties? Well, nowadays, great. Jug pets don't kill XP, they're really strong, the Beastmaster is really strong, it's all good news. 75 era, not so much. Even after the jug pet XP fix, they really weren't all that strong. I mean, they probably were, but more importantly, there was a stigma surrounding them. Pets couldn't get party buffs, people just didn't want to deal with it, it was added complexity, it was more unknown. Would they have been solid? Probably, but player mindset was dead set against it, and for that alone, it's gotta get docked a few points for just being a frustrating experience. I will say, a party with 5 beasts and a red mage though, I bet was a blast, if you ever actually managed to get it done. But most beasts were off soloing by themselves, that's the problem, you couldn't get them to stay in a party for more than 10 seconds. But this is where this list gets a little ridiculous. Obviously, beasts can do insane stuff in or out of a party, but Square Enix had just left it so broken and non-partyable for so long that no one was willing to try. So finally, missions. Mission is done all right. No one's worried about XP, so you can pull out a jug pets with abandon. Problem is, you can't pull them out every 2 seconds, so if one goes down, you're essentially back to that like shitty warrior status. Most missions don't have charmable mobs, so that's out, and it doesn't really offer anything besides the safe damage of having the pet be a sponge for enemy attacks. Just wasn't the usual first pick, because for years there was little to no control over what ability the pet used at a possibly crucial moment, and not much in the way of keeping the pet alive outside of once every few minutes throwing a reward out there. I'm not saying they were terrible, it was just tough to work them into any kind of solid, predictable strategy. At 119, like I was saying, they're death machines, but still, there are probably other options that achieve the same kind of results without the beastly downside. Pet jobs in general are just kind of tough sometimes. Really though, Beast is insane. I can't believe I'm listing it on a bad jobs list. I mean, Beastmaster is a powerhouse in general. It was just kind of weird, and weird in MMO usually means not good in the eyes of many. I still think this list is kind of absurd. These jobs are great, but we're already going, so let's keep it up. Number 3, Dancer. Look, Dancer's not a bad job, which is so stupid to say on a list of bad jobs. I think it's a really cool job, and its introduction to the game changed how people thought about partying. But sort of like Beast, it's a job that kind of breaks how Final Fantasy XI was designed. And for a long time, people just didn't really know what to do with that information. Dancer provides party buffs, enemy debuffs, and party heals through the use of TP instead of MP. It wields pointy little daggers and has one of the most nonsensical storyline explanations I think I've ever encountered. Seriously, I still don't get how they're useful in battle from a lore perspective. I just don't. I guess it's like a bard conversation, but at least bards like have historical relevance. Now at 119, they've gotten some incredible abilities and buffs that make them some serious powerhouses in the damage department. They can also fire up some ridiculous self-skill chains and huge weapon skill numbers, which is awesome. So honestly, this ranking leans more towards their 75 days, in which they kind of struggled. Take this, if you enter a fight as a tank and immediately realize the fight might be too hard for you, white mages, red mage, any mage has you covered. They can immediately blow some cures on you to get you back up and running. Yeah, they're blowing through a lot of MP, but that's okay in the short term. Dancers had to get TP first. It was all about a balance of maintaining enough TP to support the party and make fights go faster, while spending as much as that TP on buffs, heals, support moves to make it go faster. This made initial moments kind of tense sometimes and limited the types of enemies Dancers really could XP on, but we'll get to that in a second. Dancers also used Dagger, infamously frustrating with how much TP it provided the enemy and how crappy most of the weapon skills could be. Now Dancers did have subtle blow like ninjas and monks, which was nice, but still, white mages aren't feeding the enemy TP, and the dagger damage isn't like a ton. Those daggers just stabbed until the enemy resorted to a huge blowback with how much TP it was getting. Not always that fun. So how does it rank on the list? Well, okay. So soloing is kind of weird. It has decent evasion, as the only hybrid damage dealer healer that I'm aware of. It seems like a perfect fit, and for the most part it was. But you had to get some really solid gear to like increase your damage output or evasion, and it certainly wasn't going to be doing it very fast. Remember that dagger problem I was mentioning? Dancer for the most part just wasn't killing anything super quick. That meant that for XP at least, soloing wasn't really going to be getting them anywhere fast. I've heard cool stories of Dancers soloing really tough enemies and daring feats, but it was a dangerous way to solo, focusing mainly on evasion gear and their ability to out-heal the damage being done to them. If you decided things were going well and weapon skilled at the wrong time, you could screw yourself. It wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't easy. So how about parties? Well, in theory, it was one of the best. Healing without the need to rest for MP, it had to keep fighting to keep going. This is ideal. Problem is, it required heavily on being able to always gain TP faster than it could heal, and you couldn't slow down. If it wasn't going well, you're just kind of screwed. You can't like rest. It was more gear dependent than most jobs because its ability to keep people alive was reliant on how much it could hit the enemy and how fast it could do it. This meant that it would really shine when the party was fighting very tough enemies, but for a while people drifted towards fighting incredibly tough because of camp congestion. Quick rundown of that, the game seems to be designed towards fighting very tough enemies very quickly. It's where merit burn parties came to be. But as servers got more and more packed and camps got less and less available, you'd kind of try to get a step up. You'd go to the incredibly tough. For more XP, it would take a little bit longer, but that would kind of balance out. And as more people started to do this, more camps opened up, it was just good all around. Everybody was cool with this, except Dancer, because with that careful balance at risk, incredibly tough versus very tough could mean the difference between a functioning party and one that just didn't really work. Now again, at 99, things are different, and they're such a powerhouse DD in their own right, I consider them one of the stronger jobs. But the 75 era just wasn't quite ready for them in my opinion. So finally, missions, and this one is a no-brainer and really why they're on this list. These are some of the toughest enemies in the game, and when you could choose between one of the healers that can also debuff the enemy with paralyzes, slows, some of the stuff that makes the difference between victory and defeat, as well as pre-buff your party, before you attack the enemy, And then Dancer, who hopefully could get rolling in a minute or two into the fight, you really wouldn't risk it. Now, inviting them as a DD was one thing, but at 75, I still feel like they were a little weak in this area. It was just an unknown entity, and we all know how people react to strange party setups for missions. I'm not saying it couldn't work, and good dancers earned some serious bragging rights, but you couldn't just muscle through with a bad player like you could with some jobs. Crazy cool job though, and like I said, really, this argument all goes to shit if you're focused on 119, because it's a badass. But yeah, this video is dumb. I can't believe you're still watching. Let's just get on with it. Number 2, Thief. One of my first jobs to 75 and one of my favorite jobs of all time, the only lockpicking badass in the game, and definitely the second worst job ever. Now don't get me wrong, Thief is super cool and its hate management and spike damage was just awesome in many scenarios, but it required so much damn setup. It was a job that relied more on the positioning and teamwork of your party members than any other I can think of, with pre-vokes, correct rear positioning. It was just a lot. I mean, this job literally almost destroyed friendships with me, with people starting a fight and then slightly moving around the corner right as I'm about to do my sneak attack, trick attack. Oh my, it still bothers me. It still frustrates me so much. Now, we obviously did it as a Final Fantasy XI community. There were a lot of thieves, there were a lot of people subbing Thief, and we did it all the time. But how often would your tank shift, like, just wrong, or take too long and get your Dark Knight pre-voker killed? A lot of the time, people just didn't want to deal with it. Now, I loved it for all of this, for being quicker than others, positioning myself just right, even behind annoying Elvons that were somehow, like, thinner than others, but also further away from the enemy, and they were just super frustrating. For leveling range, so I could hit enemies with acid bolts and lower the defense by 20%. I loved it for Treasure Hunter and how many little beehive chips I could get on Thief versus other jobs. It was awesome. It was both my favorite and least favorite experiences of the game. But there were jobs that could just deal damage easier and without the special needs of Thief. And remember that dagger problem we were talking about? Thief didn't get Subtle Blow. You'd overload the enemy with TP, or you're saving up for your Dancing Edge or Evisceration, which by the way, were just like okay. Abyssia took their evasion to another level for sure, but before then they were just kind of average at best for a lot of the game. Before Viper Bite, ugh, oh my god, they might actually be the worst job before Viper Bite. Do you remember before Sneak Attack and Trick Attack, where like you had, what was it, Wasp Sting? Jesus. That range where Viper Bite kind of trails off right before you get Dancing Edge, ugh. And then finally you got Shark Bite and you could open up light skill chains, but it just wasn't that great. At least by then they'd fixed Trick Attack, but there was a period where Trick Attack wasn't fixed. They put in an update at one point so that at 60, Trick Attack could act on his own from behind a party member without having to incorporate it with Sneak Attack. But there was a period of time where the damage bonus of Trick Attack was tied to Sneak Attack, and you couldn't get it unless you tied them together in one major attack, even at 75. Nobody at 75 wanted to do pre-voking before weapon skill to switch hate real quick so you could Sneak Attack, Trick Attack on a paladin. Nobody wanted to do that. But enough of my thievery stories. How does it rank? So soloing, this one's actually kind of a toughie. In many ways, it's one of the best in the game, with its insane evasion keeping it alive long after most would have died. However, that was more of a deal post 75, and at 75 you just had to really go nuts on the acid bolts, the blind bolts, the bloody bolts, and you just couldn't always hit stuff with that. It was still fairly good, but look, it's not going to get any real experience points that way. If you use Dancer Sub to maintain off and you can heal, you lose the Ninja Sub and get smacked with single target spells and the occasional hit. It was just okay. It was like most DDs, maybe a little more evasive and survivable than some, but really didn't offer anything crazy. Parties, it could be one of the best, or absolute worst, and mostly it came down to player skill and how willing the other party members were to work with you. Before 60 and the Trick Attack fix, it was one of the most demanding jobs of your other party members. And after that, it's still kind of nice if they'll just frickin' stand still for once. It's a great puller and can always find a reason to be valuable for that alone. I was super proud of pulling for a merit party once when we couldn't find a bard and using sleep bolts to keep the enemies distracted and ready as soon as somebody else was ready to finish them off. Now that I'm talking about it, I'm honestly forgetting why it's number 2 worst jobs. I loved partying as Thief. I was so proud of my Thief. It was freaking awesome. But with how we've been talking about everything else, honestly, it did put a lot of strain on other people, and it was just sort of difficult in some ways. So how about the missions? Right, yes. How annoying. Endgame content like Dynamis loved Thief. Who wouldn't adore some treasure hunter adding to the party's coffers, if I can quote Brady Games Guide? Oh, but just one though. No reason to overload it with more thieves. That's right, it was incredibly valued for its unique treasure hunter, but there really wasn't any need to bring more than one thief. Well, that's more useful than some jobs, I guess. I still don't count it as all that great. Missions and quests, it could be decent, but unlike a party where you've got a few fights to figure it out, if someone screws up that placement, you might ruin the whole fight. Again, look, it was a decent damage dealer and it has some unique little traits to it, but with all that TP you were feeding and not much else to offer the fight other than that hate management, it was just a tough call. Look, again, I loved Thief, but for years I struggled to get parties, I eked out as much damage as I could trying to prove it was valuable, and nobody ever wanted to deal with it. For all that alone, I have to put it as number 2 on the list. So who's number 1? And as no surprise to I think anybody who's ever watched one of my videos, we're bringing us to Puppet Master. My god, the Puppet Master. Look, most of you know by now, Puppet Master is like one of my favorite jobs. I've played a lot of MMOs, I've never seen anything like Puppet Master. It's just the best. But that doesn't mean it didn't struggle ridiculously at 75. And even at 119, it's sort of uniquely talented in specific areas, but not great at other things. So let's start with back in the day. Puppet Master was entirely reliant on what attachments you had for the pup and which were equipped. In theory, it could do all sorts of things like flash, provoke, shield bash, double attack, haste itself, convert, refresh, heals, buff, drains, aspers, offensive magic, healing magic. I mean, that shit's cool. The sky's the limit. Of course, you couldn't do it all at the same time. Your attachments and gear configurations determine what kind of puppet you were using and what it could do. More importantly, though, it would determine how it would prioritize that stuff it could do. And prioritize is the key word there. Prioritize. The Puppet Master only has so much control over what the pup does. By applying elemental maneuvers to it, you basically give it suggestions. Sometimes it was as simple as an ice maneuver makes them more likely to cast Paralyze, which is ice-based. Okay, makes sense. It could also mean that it will apply attachments to that elemental type, such as provokes for fire maneuvers. Sure, okay. It was just, when you combine those two and the other weird ways that the puppet acted in terms of like how often it would cast spells, how often it would use abilities, it just kind of got complicated. More importantly though, it wasn't always easy to quickly switch from one thing to another. In emergency situations, there wasn't that much you could do unless the puppet was already planning on doing it. You could never tell it to like go now or to wait. It would just do things when it wanted to. It wasn't bad, and it's certainly gotten way better over the years. It just made it unreliable in some ways. And in Final Fantasy XI, the last thing you wanted to be was unreliable. As better attachments were added into the game, the puppet became stronger and easier to manage over time. But some of them were and still are just ridiculously expensive. So let's get into how it ranks and why. Soloing. Before the days of Trust, Pup was a pretty cool soloer, with a white mage puppet providing a truly pocket white mage in the days where such a thing was a dream. But it could be dumb. Are you blinded and at 300 HP? You might determine that a blindness is what you really need at that moment. And then it's 13 seconds or whatever ridiculous wait time it was till he gets back to you. Now in 119, pups are actually pretty ridiculous soloers, but mostly it comes down to two things. One, the puppet can get a crazy amount of damage taken down and crazy regen, and two, the Puppet Master can also get a crazy amount of damage taken down. But that wasn't really an option way back when, so tanking on anything too hard would quickly result in your puppet being unable to keep up with the healing speed, and sending in your little automaton to tank would likely just get him a quick, swift death. It's not the worst in the world, and it's probably better than some, but it wasn't going to win any awards. Regardless, this isn't really where the struggle was. Pups were always alone, they were used to it. Partying was the problem. Partying, in theory, pups should be amazing. Twice the damage because there's two of you, even if less potent, more flexibility to fill party needs, it's great. Unfortunately, in an era where bard buffs were all the rage, the puppet was untouchable. It couldn't receive those buffs. It was pretty strong in its own right, but while everybody else was steadily improving because of the buffs, it was just kind of hanging out there doing its own thing. Sure, the pup himself would be buffed, but there was the issue of not having any good weapon skills. I really think that Raging Fist was like the best option if they didn't have Stringing Pummel. Years later, they finally got access to Azure and Fist and everything beyond, but that wasn't for a long time. The automaton tank wasn't good enough to tank for a party full time, and it couldn't be healed by anybody else, so that's out. The black mage was too inconsistent to be used to fight at merit party speed for the most part, and the white mage version couldn't keep up to fully top off a party. Most of the time, the red mages and white mages had that covered anyway. The ranger was basically your only real option, which is awesome. I mean, it's very good at damage, despite the supposed flexibility. The ranger was basically your only real option, despite the supposed flexibility, and as great as it was, it couldn't really take advantage of the rest of your party makeup. It wasn't really till later that you could tell it to wait to fire off weapon skills until it could skill chain effectively. And again, there was the whole buff problem. Now at 119, all of this has changed, mostly due to changes in available attachments that allow players to tweak the behavior and strength of a puppet better to match the situation. But it doesn't change the years and years of persecution and struggle. But now we get to the really fun part, missions and endgame content. Pup was weird. Pup was not always fast, it wasn't always guaranteed, and it wasn't quick to react to an emergency situation. These are the things people look for in Dynamis runs, BCNMs, Tenzin fights. You can't have a healer that has to choose whether it'll cast Selenia or Cure on a dying party member in a crucial moment, or a tank that can't be healed by other players, or a ranger puppet that fires off a weapon skill regardless of whether or not you were trying to carefully set up a skill chain at that moment. They were just difficult to work with for very specific use cases. Everyone had to work around the puppet and not the other way around. And while puppet itself was very strong, most people didn't want to deal with that added complexity and its limitations. Some of this was stigma, others were legitimate complaints, but it just wasn't usually picked for, intense stuff. Plus, you still had the puppet problems. If it died for any reason, it was a bit of time before you could pop one back out. Deus Ex Automata helped a little bit with that, but it wasn't always a thing. Plus, I mean, if you're in a dangerous situation where your puppet keeps dying, what does it matter if you can pop out one that has like no health and also doesn't want you to use any maneuver? Look guys, I can't explain how dumb this list has been. I think 4 out of 5 on this list were actually my favorite jobs in the game, besides like a couple that didn't make it. Like I've said in the past, my favorite part about Final Fantasy XI was how every job had a unique purpose and can fulfill that really well. Some jobs are more useful across various areas than others, but if this video has shown anything, I'd hope that it was mostly player opinion and stigma that prevented jobs from getting used. Much more so than actual strength anyway. Beyond that, years of ebb and flow with bug fixes and expansions and everything else disrupting who was top dog means that there really is no way to measure the worst jobs. It was just a fun list, but let me know which jobs you think shouldn't have been on it, and definitely more importantly, which jobs should have been. I also debated including Dark Knight for the same reasons basically that it was on the top 5 strongest, that yeah, it's super strong, but it tends to kill itself. Summoner for once existing with only Carbuncle and Elemental Spirits, because that alone just puts it right down here. Ranger, because it's pay to win. Monk, because it's 2018, and basically now just a puppet master without a puppet, but for years Monk was pretty solid. Keep on the lookout for more Final Fantasy XI videos coming in the future, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace. As always guys, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, you should totally think about subscribing. I've got videos coming out twice a week, and if you like this one, there's at least a chance you'll like some of the others that are very similar to this, so live dangerously. Let me know what you guys thought about the video in the comments and other videos you'd like to see. And finally, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Huntin for Games to keep up with all the latest stuff. See ya.